The winter of 1826 brought an unusual cold to the Virginia Piedmont. Ice formed on the James River earlier than anyone could remember, and the enslaved people working the tobacco fields of Belmont Manor moved through frozen earth that resisted the plow. But inside the manor house, fires burned in every room, and a different kind of coldness had settled into the bones of the place. This coldness had nothing to do with temperature. It had everything to do with what was about to arrive. Her name was Celia Whitmore. She was 19 years old, and she had been purchased specifically because of her face. The records are precise about this. The bill of sale, discovered in 2003 inside a water-damaged trunk at an estate auction in Richmond, describes her in terms that make the skin crawl even 200 years later. Female, approximately 19 years, exceptional in countenance and form, light complexion, educated in household management, highly suitable for personal service. The price paid was 3 times the average for an enslaved woman of her age. 3 times. The seller, a Charleston merchant named Tobias Brennan, had noted in his private ledger that the buyer, Samuel Belmont, had visited his household 7 times before making the purchase, each visit longer than the last. Samuel Belmont was 41 years old, a widower of 3 years. His wife had died giving birth to their stillborn son, and the manor house had remained in a state of suspended mourning ever since. The furniture stayed draped in cloth. The curtains remained drawn. Samuel himself, according to letters from his sister Margaret, had become a ghost in his own home, attending to plantation business with mechanical efficiency, but showing no interest in society, in remarriage, in anything that suggested a future, until he saw Celia Whitmore. What happened next is documented in fragments, pieces of a story that no one wanted to preserve, but that survived anyway in the margins of other records, in the observations of people who witnessed what they couldn't speak about openly, in the careful notations of those who knew something dark was unfolding but felt powerless to stop it. Celia arrived at Belmont Manor on December 3rd, 1826. The household ledger shows an unusual flurry of expenses in the days before her arrival. New linens for what was called the East Chamber, a room on the 2nd floor directly across from Samuel's own bedroom. A dressing table with a mirror, fabric that the invoice describes as fine cotton, unsuitable for field wear. A pair of leather shoes that cost more than most enslaved people would see in a lifetime. These purchases were not recorded in the main estate accounts, but in a separate ledger that Samuel kept locked in his study. A ledger that would not be discovered until 1967, when the manor was being converted into a historical site. The woman who managed the household at that time, a free woman of color named Hannah Prescott, who worked as the head cook, left an oral history that was recorded by her great-granddaughter in 1901. In that account, Hannah describes Celia's arrival. She came in the afternoon with nothing but the clothes she wore and a small bundle. Mr. Belmont met her at the door himself, which was not the way of things. He led her upstairs personally, showed her to the room he'd prepared. I was bringing up fresh water, and I heard him tell her that she would take her meals in the house, that she would attend to his personal needs, that she was to consider herself under his direct protection. The way he said protection made my stomach turn. She stood there silent, looking at nothing, her face like carved stone. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, and in that moment, I knew beauty was going to destroy her. For the first months of 1827, life at Belmont Manor followed a pattern that everyone in the household recognized, but no one discussed. Celia was seen only in the late afternoons and evenings, moving through the house like a shadow, always impeccably dressed in the fine fabrics Samuel provided, always silent, always alone except when Samuel required her presence. She took her meals on a tray in her room. She spoke to no one. The other enslaved people in the household whispered about her situation, but Hannah Prescott, according to her account, forbade open discussion. There was nothing we could do, nothing anyone could do. The law was on his side. God, apparently, was looking elsewhere. In May of 1827, Celia's circumstances changed in a way that would have been obvious to anyone paying attention. The household ledger shows a payment to Dr. William Garrett for a consultation regarding a delicate female condition, purchases of ginger root and chamomile tea, remedies for morning sickness, an alteration of the fine dresses to accommodate a changing figure. Samuel Belmont's private journal, which was found tucked inside a hollowed-out law book in his study during the 1967 renovation, contains an entry dated May 15th, 1827. Providence has granted what I dared not hope for. A new life stirs within Belmont's walls. Perhaps this is my redemption. Perhaps this is how God tells me to stop mourning the past and build a future. The language is telling. He doesn't say a new life stirs within Celia. He says within Belmont's walls, as if the manor itself were pregnant, as if Celia's body were simply another room in his house. By autumn, preparations intensified. Dr. Garrett began making weekly visits to the manor, documenting each examination in his medical diary with careful euphemisms. The patient at Belmont shows satisfactory progress. The expected event should occur in late January. The patient remains in good health, though notably withdrawn in manner. That last observation, notably withdrawn, is perhaps the only acknowledgement in any official document that Celia Whitmore was a human being with an internal life, with feelings about what was happening to her. What were those feelings? We can only guess from the one piece of evidence that speaks in her voice. In 1989, during archaeological excavations in the old slave quarters behind Belmont Manor, researchers found a shallow depression beneath what had once been the kitchen house. Wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture was a small book, handmade from folded paper and bound with thread. The pages contained writing in two different hands. One hand, educated and flowing, was later identified through comparison as Samuel Belmont's. The other hand, less practiced but clear, belonged to someone who had learned to write despite laws that made teaching enslaved people to read and write a criminal offense. The second hand, which experts believe was Celia's, had written only a few entries. One of them, dated September 1827, reads, "He speaks of the child as if it belongs to him alone, as if I am merely the vessel, the soil in which he has planted his seed. He talks of names, of future, of what this child will mean for his legacy. He never asks what it means to me. How can I explain that I feel nothing? No joy, no hope, no mother's love. Only the knowledge that something is growing inside me that will bind me to this place, to him, forever. Or perhaps not forever. Perhaps only until he tires of me, until my face ages, until beauty fades. Then what becomes of me? What becomes of a child born into this situation? These are questions he does not ask because the answers would disturb his dream." She was 19 years old and carrying a child she had no choice in creating, writing by candlelight in a book she had to keep hidden, already understanding with terrible clarity what her future held. The child was born on January 28, 1828. Dr. Garrett's medical diary describes an uncomplicated delivery of a healthy male infant. Samuel Belmont's journal erupts with joy. "A son! After so many years of grief, God has blessed me with a son. He is perfect in every way. Strong lungs, clear eyes, a fighter from his first breath. I have named him Thomas after my father. He will be everything. He will carry Belmont forward into the future." But there was a problem Samuel hadn't fully considered until the child lay in his arms. Thomas had Celia's features. The light brown skin, the soft curls, the unmistakable evidence of his mixed parentage. In polite Virginia society, such children were common enough, but they were supposed to remain invisible, relegated to the slave quarters, acknowledged only in whispers. Samuel Belmont wanted something different. He wanted this son to matter, to inherit, to bear his name. And Virginia law in 1828 made that legally impossible. The next months reveal a man slowly coming apart under the weight of irreconcilable desires. His journal entries become erratic, defensive, grandiose. Why should the circumstances of birth determine a child's future? Thomas has my blood, my intellect will guide him, my resources will support him. Society's prejudices are the problem, not my son. He began spending enormous sums on the child. A nursery was established in the east chamber next to Celia's room. A wet nurse was brought in, though Celia was fully capable of nursing. Clothing, toys, a silver rattle that was later found and is now displayed in the Virginia Historical Society Museum. He commissioned a portrait of the infant, which hung in his study where business associates could see it, and when asked, he would say only, "A child of the household." Celia's role in all of this is harder to trace. Hannah Prescott's oral history provides glimpses. She was with the baby constantly, but there was something absent in her. She would hold him, feed him, care for him with perfect competence, but it was like watching someone perform a duty rather than love a child. Mr. Belmont noticed. I heard him ask her once if she loved the boy. She looked at him with those empty eyes and said, I do what is required. He seemed satisfied with that answer, which tells you everything about what he understood of love. Thomas thrived through the spring and summer of 1828. The household accounts show purchases of medicine only for normal infant complaints, teething discomfort, minor colds. Dr. Garrett's visits became less frequent. Everything seemed on the surface to be proceeding according to Samuel Belmont's vision of his unusual family. Then autumn arrived, and with it, the first death. On September 14, 1828, 8-month-old Thomas developed a fever. It came on suddenly during the night. By morning, the child was convulsing. Dr. Garrett was summoned immediately, but the treatments available in 1828 were primitive at best. Bloodletting, cold compresses, laudanum to ease the seizures. Nothing worked. Thomas died on September 16th, having lived just over 7 months. Samuel Belmont's journal entries from this period are almost incoherent with grief. God has taken him. Why? What sin have I committed that warrants this punishment? The house is silent again, as silent as it was after my wife's death. I cannot bear it. I cannot bear this emptiness again. But then, just 3 days after Thomas's death, a different tone emerges. Perhaps this was meant to be. Perhaps Thomas was not strong enough for the life I envisioned. Nature culls the weak. The next will be stronger. We will try again. Read that again. We will try again. As if Celia were a failed experiment. As if her grief, if she felt any, was irrelevant to his plans. Thomas was not buried in the family cemetery where Samuel's wife lay. Instead, a small plot was established at the edge of the formal gardens, near a magnolia tree that Samuel's grandfather had planted. The grave was marked with a simple stone that read only Thomas 1828, no last name. No indication of parentage, a child whose death was noted but whose life remained officially unacknowledged. Hannah Prescott's account describes the burial. Miss Celia stood at the grave while they lowered the tiny coffin. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just stood there with her hands folded, staring at the ground. Mr. Belmont wept openly, made a scene of his grief, but her silence was more disturbing than any tears could have been. After everyone left, I saw her kneel beside the fresh dirt. She stayed there until dark. When I finally came to bring her inside, she looked up at me and said, "One." Just that word. One. I didn't understand what she meant until later. By December of 1828, just 3 months after Thomas's death, Celia was pregnant again. The household ledger shows renewed purchases of ginger root, chamomile tea, the familiar preparations. Samuel's journal reveals his state of mind. Providence grants me another chance. This child will be the one. I am certain of it. Celia is young, healthy, capable of bearing many children. We will have the son I was meant to have, many children. The phrase sits on the page like a threat. The second child, a daughter, was born on August 3, 1829. Samuel named her Margaret after his sister, though his sister Margaret would later claim she had never given permission for this honor and was disturbed by the entire situation. A letter from Margaret Belmont to her cousin in Philadelphia, dated November 1829, was discovered in a private collection in 2011. The letter is devastating in its honesty. I visited Samuel last month and met the child he has named after me. She is beautiful, there's no denying it, taking after her mother in every feature. But the situation is grotesque. He parades this infant around as if she were legitimate, speaks of her future, of education, of finding her a suitable marriage when she comes of age. To whom? She is, in the eyes of the law and society, enslaved. Yet he refuses to acknowledge this reality. And the mother, this Celia woman, moves through the house like a ghost. I tried to speak with her to offer some female companionship, but she looked at me with such emptiness that I faltered. Your brother has everything planned, she said. He plans their futures. I plan nothing. What did she mean by that? I cannot shake the feeling that something terrible is unfolding at Belmont, something beyond even the obvious moral transgression. Margaret Belmont was right to be disturbed, because baby Margaret lived only 5 months. On January 11, 1830, the infant was found dead in her cradle. Dr. Garrett's examination, recorded in his medical diary, concluded sudden cessation of breath, no apparent cause. Healthy at evening examination, deceased by morning, no signs of violence or distress, cause unknown. Sudden infant death was not uncommon in the 19th century, but 2 healthy infants, both dying unexpectedly, both before their first birthday, began to form a pattern that Dr. Garrett himself noted. His diary contains an entry dated January 12, 1830. This is the second child lost at Belmont within 18 months. While infant mortality is regrettably common, these circumstances bear unusual similarity. Both children appeared healthy hours before death. Both showed no signs of illness or injury. I have suggested to Mr. Belmont that perhaps the nursery location is unhealthy, that some miasma or bad air may be affecting the infants. He has refused to consider changing the room. He is also speaking of trying again, which I find disturbing so soon after this loss. I fear his desire for an heir is overwhelming his judgment. Margaret was buried beside Thomas under the magnolia tree. The stone read, Margaret, 1829-1830. Samuel's journal entry for that day is brief. God is testing me. I will not fail this test. We will continue, and they did continue. By April of 1830, Celia was pregnant for the third time. She was 23 years old and had already borne 2 children, buried 2 children, and was carrying a third. Hannah Prescott's oral history describes seeing Celia during this pregnancy. She had changed. Physically, she was still beautiful, still young, but something in her had hardened. She no longer moved like a ghost. She moved with purpose, though I couldn't discern what that purpose was. She spent hours in the garden, particularly near the magnolia tree where the babies were buried. I saw her there once, collecting something from the plants. When I asked what she was gathering, she showed me. Herbs, foxglove, pennyroyal, tansy. I knew those plants. I knew what they could do. Miss Celia, I said, what are you planning? She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. I'm planning mercy, she said. The only mercy available? Then she walked away, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding, understanding and not wanting to understand. The third child, another son, was born on December 20th, 1830. Samuel named him Benjamin. The birth was uncomplicated. The baby was healthy, vigorous even. Dr. Garrett's notes describe a robust male infant, excellent vital signs, strong reflexes. For the first weeks, everything seemed different. Benjamin ate well, slept well, gained weight appropriately. Samuel's journal overflows with relief and hope. Benjamin will be the one who survives. I feel it. He is stronger than the others. He will live to carry the Belmont name forward. But on March 8, 1831, just before Benjamin's third month, he began showing signs of illness. Not a sudden fever like Thomas, not a mysterious night death like Margaret, but a gradual weakening. He ate less, slept more. His vigorous cries became feeble whimpers. Dr. Garrett was called and observed the child for 3 days, documenting the decline. The infant shows progressive failure to thrive. No fever, no rash, no indication of common childhood diseases. Simply a steady loss of vitality, as if the life force itself is draining from the child. I am at a loss. I have examined the milk, the nursery conditions, the child's physical form. Everything should support life. Yet the child is dying. Benjamin died on March 12, 1831. He was buried under the magnolia tree with his siblings. The stone read, Benjamin 1830-1831, 3 children, 3 graves, all before their first birthday. And Samuel Belmont still did not stop. His journal entry from March 15, 1831, reveals a man detaching from reality. 3 times I have been denied, but I am not a man who surrenders to fate. Celia is young. We have time. The next child will be the one. Perhaps the problem has been with the children themselves, some weakness in their constitution. The next one will be different, stronger, better. Notice the language. The problem has been with the children themselves, not with the situation, not with forcing an enslaved woman to bear child after child, to watch them die one after another. The problem was the children. They weren't strong enough for Samuel Belmont's dream. By summer of 1831, Celia was pregnant again, the 4th time in 5 years. She was 24 years old, and according to Hannah Prescott's account, something had shifted fundamentally in how she carried herself. She had stopped pretending. That's the only way I can describe it. Before, even in her silence, there had been a kind of performance, a maintaining of the role Mr. Belmont had assigned her. But after Benjamin's death, that performance ended. She spoke only when directly addressed. She ate only what was necessary. She moved through the house like she was already a ghost herself, just waiting for her body to realize it. The 4th child, a daughter, was born on February 28, 1832. Samuel named her Elizabeth. and this time he took precautions that revealed how desperately he feared another loss. Dr. Garrett was instructed to visit daily. A woman from the household, specifically Hannah Prescott, was assigned to watch the baby around the clock. The nursery was cleaned obsessively. Every herb, every remedy, every possible intervention was employed to ensure this child's survival. For 3 months, Elizabeth thrived. She was a calm baby, easy to soothe, quick to smile. Samuel began to believe his precautions had worked, that this child would break the terrible pattern. His journal entries from this period are almost manic with relief and joy. Elizabeth is everything I hoped for. She is strong, healthy, beautiful. She will grow up here at Belmont. I will educate her myself. She will be accomplished, refined, extraordinary. Yes, there will be challenges due to her circumstances, but we will overcome them. We must. But on May 30th, 1832, Elizabeth began having difficulty breathing. Dr. Garrett was summoned immediately. He found the infant in acute respiratory distress, struggling for each breath. Despite his interventions, despite Samuel's desperate prayers, despite everything, Elizabeth died on June 1st, 1832. She was 3 months old. The pattern was now undeniable. 4 children, 4 deaths, all healthy at birth, all dying within their first year, and all dying differently enough that no clear cause could be identified. Dr. Garrett, to his credit, began asking questions that others were afraid to voice. His medical diary contains an entry dated June 3, 1832 that was clearly never intended for other eyes. I can no longer ignore what my mind has been suggesting for months. 4 children, all healthy initially, all dying before age 1. The circumstances strain credibility. While infant mortality is common, this pattern is not. I have examined every possible natural cause: bad air, tainted milk, infectious disease, constitutional weakness. None adequately explain all 4 deaths. I am left with possibilities I dare not speak aloud. Could someone be deliberately ending these lives? But who and why? Mr. Belmont is devastated by each loss, his grief clearly genuine. The mother, Celia, shows almost no emotion, but grief takes many forms. Could she? But no. What mother would harm her own children? Unless she saw it not as harm but as mercy. Unless she understood something about their future that made death seem preferable to life. He never spoke these suspicions aloud, but he wrote them in his private diary, and that diary survived, found among his great-grandson's effects in 1957, now preserved in the archives of the Virginia Medical Historical Society. The words sit on the page like an accusation, a question that Dr. Garrett couldn't answer, and that we, 200 years later, still struggle to answer definitively. 4 children buried under the magnolia tree, 4 stones marking lives that barely began. And Samuel Belmont still not done, still not willing to accept that his dream was impossible. In the autumn of 1832, something changed in the household at Belmont Manor. Multiple sources document this shift. Though each observer interpreted it differently, Samuel Belmont's sister Margaret visited again in October and wrote to her cousin that the atmosphere in the house has become oppressive, almost suffocating. Samuel barely speaks to anyone. He takes his meals in his study. And that woman, Celia, I saw her only once during my entire visit. She was standing at a window, just staring out at the magnolia tree and those 4 small graves. When I approached, she didn't acknowledge my presence. I spoke her name twice before she turned. They're together now, she said. That's all that matters. They're together and they're free. I asked what she meant, but she simply walked away. I told Samuel he should release her, send her somewhere else, that this situation has destroyed them both. He looked at me like I'd suggested he cut off his own arm. She stays, he said. She's mine, and she stays. The possessiveness in his voice terrified me. By December 1832, Celia was pregnant for the 5th time. She was 25 years old, had been at Belmont Manor for 6 years, had borne 4 children, and buried 4 children. Hannah Prescott's oral history describes this pregnancy as different from the others. She barely showed. She ate almost nothing. I worried she would lose the child before it was born, but she carried it somehow. She spent more and more time alone, walking the grounds, sitting by the graves, speaking to no one. Mr. Belmont seemed afraid of her now, though he'd never admit it. He would watch her from windows, but he rarely approached her anymore. The intimacy between them, forced as it had been, was gone. She had become something he couldn't control, and it unnerved him. The fifth child was born on July 15, 1833. Another son. Samuel named him William. Dr. Garrett's notes on the birth are clinical, detached. Delivered a male infant, smaller than typical but breathing adequately. Mother showed no emotional response to the birth. When I placed the child in her arms, she held him mechanically, but did not look at his face. Mr. Belmont took the child from her within minutes, clearly disturbed by her lack of maternal affect. The situation at Belmont has moved beyond my medical expertise into territory I am unequipped to navigate. William lived for 6 weeks. He died on August 28, 1833. The cause, according to Dr. Garrett, was failure to thrive, though the infant showed no signs of disease or injury. He simply stopped eating, stopped responding, and eventually stopped breathing. The fifth stone was placed under the magnolia tree. William, 1833. After William's death, something broke in Samuel Belmont. His journal entries become erratic, paranoid, desperate. 5 children, and God has taken them all. What is the message? What am I meant to understand? I have given everything, sacrificed everything, and I am left with nothing but graves. Celia barely speaks now. She looks at me with eyes that hold no fear, no love, no recognition even. She has become a stranger, but we will try again, we must. I cannot accept that this is my fate, to be denied the legacy I deserve. But Celia's body, pushed beyond reasonable limits, was failing. The household ledger from late 1833 shows increased medical expenses. Dr. Garrett's visits became weekly, then twice weekly. His diary describes treating Celia for exhaustion, malnutrition, and what he delicately termed female maladies consistent with excessive childbearing. In modern medical terms, Celia was experiencing uterine prolapse, anemia, and possibly early organ failure. Her body, forced to endure 5 pregnancies in 6 years, each followed by the physical and emotional trauma of a child's death, was shutting down. Yet in January 1834, impossibly, she was pregnant again. The 6th time. Dr. Garrett's diary entry from the examination is filled with barely concealed horror. I have examined CW and confirmed her condition. I must speak plainly here, as I cannot speak plainly to Mr. Belmont. This woman is dying. Her body cannot sustain another pregnancy. I have told him this as clearly as I dare, but he dismisses my concerns. He speaks of providence, of destiny, of his right to heirs. He has lost all perspective. This will kill her. The pregnancy, the birth, or the aftermath, but something will kill her. And when she dies, it will be on my conscience that I did not do more to prevent it. The 6th pregnancy was difficult from the start. Celia could barely keep food down. She lost weight even as the child grew inside her. Her skin took on a grayish pallor. Her hair began falling out. Hannah Prescott's account describes seeing her in April 1834. She looked like death walking. So thin her bones showed through her skin. But her belly kept growing. This grotesque contrast between her wasting body and the life she carried. I begged her to eat, brought her whatever she might tolerate. She would take a few bites and push the rest away. It doesn't matter, she told me. None of it matters. This one will join the others. They all do. I asked if she was certain, and she smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her smile in years, and it chilled me to my soul. I'm certain, she said. I've made certain. The 6th child, a daughter, was born on September 9, 1834. Samuel named her Charlotte. The birth nearly killed Celia. Dr. Garrett's notes describe massive blood loss, a protracted labor that lasted nearly 2 days, and a mother who at several points appeared to be deliberately refusing to cooperate with the birth process. It was as if she was fighting against her own body's natural functions, prolonging the danger to herself. I have never seen anything like it. When the child finally emerged, CW turned her face away and would not look at the infant. Mr. Belmont took the child himself, wrapped her, cleaned her. The mother lay silent, staring at the ceiling, bleeding onto sheets that needed to be changed 3 times. I did not think she would survive the night. But Celia did survive. For 3 more weeks, she lingered in a state between life and death. Too weak to rise from bed, refusing most food, speaking rarely. Charlotte, meanwhile, was cared for by a wet nurse Samuel hired from a neighboring plantation. The baby appeared healthy, at least initially. Samuel's journal shows him clinging to hope with increasing desperation. Charlotte will live. She must. She is strong. She eats well, sleeps soundly. This one is different. This one will break the curse. On September 30th, 1834, just 3 weeks after giving birth, Celia Whitmore asked to see the baby. It was the first time she had requested this. Hannah Prescott brought Charlotte to Celia's room. What happened next is described in Hannah's oral history. I placed the baby in her arms. She looked down at Charlotte's face for a long time, just studying her. Then she began to sing. It was a lullaby, something in a language I didn't recognize, maybe something from her mother or grandmother. Her voice was so weak, barely a whisper, but the melody was beautiful and sad. The baby settled immediately, going quiet in her mother's arms. Miss Celia sang for maybe 10 minutes. Then she stopped, kissed Charlotte's forehead, and handed her back to me. "Take care of her," she said. "For the next few days, take very good care of her." Then she closed her eyes. Those were the last words she ever spoke. Celia Whitmore died on October 1st, 1834, at 27 years old. Dr. Garrett listed the cause of death as childbed fever, though his private diary reveals his doubts. C.W. passed this morning. Mr. Belmont is strangely unmoved, focused entirely on the surviving infant. He barely glanced at the mother's body. I examined her after death and found evidence consistent with childbed fever. Yes, but also with self-neglect so severe it bordered on self-destruction. Did she choose this? Did she see death as escape? I will never know, and perhaps it's better that way. Samuel Belmont had Celia buried not in the family cemetery, not under the magnolia tree with the children, but in the unmarked ground beyond the tobacco fields where the enslaved people were laid to rest. No stone, no marker, no acknowledgement of the 6 children she had borne, the 6 pregnancies that had destroyed her body, the 6 years of forced intimacy that had stolen her life before she reached 30. And baby Charlotte? She lived for exactly 3 more days. On October 4th, 1834, the wet nurse found her dead in her cradle. No signs of distress, no indication of illness. Just another small body that had stopped breathing in the night. Dr. Garrett's examination found nothing. His diary entry is brief and pointed. The 6th child has joined the others. I will not speculate further on paper about what I suspect. Some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve in writing. I will say only this. Sometimes mercy takes forms we dare not acknowledge. Charlotte was buried under the magnolia tree with her 5 siblings. 6 stones, 6 names, 6 lives that barely began, and 1 woman, buried without acknowledgement, who bore them all and lost them all before turning 28. The story should end there. It doesn't. Because in 1971, during a historical survey of abandoned cemeteries in Virginia, researchers located the unmarked burial ground beyond what had been Belmont Manor's tobacco fields. Using ground-penetrating radar and careful excavation, they identified 37 graves, including one that showed signs of having been disturbed and reburied shortly after the initial interment. When they carefully excavated this particular grave, they found something unexpected. The remains of a woman, positioned in a burial pose but clutched in her skeletal hands, was a small cloth bundle. Inside the bundle were 6 tiny packets, each wrapped in fabric, each containing dried plant material. Analysis by botanists identified the contents: foxglove, pennyroyal, oleander, water hemlock, nightshade, and yew. Every single one poisonous. Every single one growing on or near Belmont Manor grounds. Every single one capable of causing death that would look natural, especially in infants. The discovery was documented in a 1972 archaeological report that was quietly filed with the Virginia Historical Society and never widely publicized. A decision was made, according to meeting minutes found later, that the implications of the finding are too disturbing and too difficult to prove conclusively to warrant public attention at this time. The packets were photographed, catalogued, and placed in archival storage where they remain today, rarely viewed, seldom discussed, but their existence raises questions that echo across time. Did Celia Whitmore deliberately poison her own children? Was each death a calculated act of mercy, a mother's desperate attempt to save her babies from a life of ambiguous slavery, neither truly enslaved nor truly free, forever trapped in the impossible space between Samuel Belmont's delusions and society's brutal realities? Or were the packets gathered for some other purpose, perhaps to take her own life, only to be found by someone after her death who placed them in her hands as a message, as evidence, as an accusation that couldn't be spoken aloud? We can't know with certainty, but if you're still watching, if you've stayed with this story through its darkest revelations, then you understand why these buried histories matter. If you found value in this, I need you to do something. Subscribe to The Sealed Room. Hit that notification bell. Share this story with someone who needs to understand that history isn't just dates and names. It's human lives, human choices, human suffering that deserves to be remembered. Because stories like Celia's were meant to stay buried, and every time we choose to look away, we help bury them deeper. Samuel Belmont never recovered from the loss of his sixth child. His journal entries after October 1834 become increasingly incoherent, filled with religious obsession, self-justification, and a growing paranoia. The servants whisper about me. I hear them when they think I cannot. They say I killed them. They say she killed them. They understand nothing. I love those children. I wanted only to give them a future. God is punishing me for sins I cannot name, cannot comprehend. The house is full of ghosts now. I hear crying at night, infant cries that stop when I light a candle. The magnolia tree has grown dark, its leaves heavy and hanging low over those 6 graves. I cannot bear to look at it anymore. By 1835, Samuel had stopped managing the plantation entirely. His business records show mounting debts, missed shipments, contracts unfulfilled. His sister Margaret attempted to intervene, arriving in March 1835 with the intention of taking control of the estate's affairs. Her letter to her cousin describes what she found. Belmont Manor has become a house of decay. Samuel barely leaves his study. He drinks from morning until night. The plantation is failing, the enslaved people are hungry and poorly clothed, the fields are going untended. But worst of all is Samuel himself. He is aged 20 years in appearance. He speaks to people who are not there, argues with empty air. When I mentioned Celia's name, he became violent, threw a decanter at the wall, and screamed that she had cursed him, that she had poisoned his children and poisoned his soul. She won, he kept saying. She won! I don't understand what victory he thinks she achieved in dying. But he is utterly convinced that she destroyed him deliberately. Margaret managed to stabilize the plantation's immediate financial crisis, but she couldn't save her brother's deteriorating mind. In September 1835, almost exactly a year after Celia's death, Samuel Belmont attempted to dig up the graves under the magnolia tree. Multiple witnesses, including the enslaved people who tried to stop him, described him clawing at the earth with his bare hands in the middle of the night, screaming that he needed to see the children, needed to understand what had killed them, needed to know if they were really dead or if Celia had somehow taken them with her. He was restrained and confined to his room. Dr. Garrett was summoned and declared Samuel unfit to manage his own affairs due to mental derangement. Margaret Belmont became the legal guardian of the estate. One of her first actions was to have the magnolia tree cut down. In a letter dated October 1835, she explained her reasoning. I cannot bear that tree standing as a monument to this tragedy. The graves will remain, marked as they are, but the tree itself seems cursed. It has become a focal point for Samuel's madness, and I believe its presence perpetuates the darkness that has consumed this place. When workers cut down the tree, they found something that no one had expected. The roots had grown down and around the 6 small coffins, wrapping them in a tight embrace, as if the tree itself had been trying to hold the children. Several workers refused to continue after seeing this, claiming it was unnatural, that trees didn't grow that way. But they did cut it down, and they left the roots where they were, intertwined with the remains. Samuel Belmont was moved to his sister's home in Charlottesville in November 1835. He lived there for 3 more years, never regaining his sanity, never speaking coherently again about Celia or the children. He died in February 1838 at the age of 53. His death certificate listed the cause as brain fever, though Margaret's private correspondence suggests he simply lost the will to live and slowly wasted away. He was buried in the family cemetery in Charlottesville, far from Belmont Manor, far from the 6 small graves, far from the woman who had haunted his final years. Belmont Manor was sold in 1840. The new owner, a merchant from Richmond named Charles Pritchard, had no knowledge of the property's history. According to his business diary, discovered in 2008, he found the estate well constructed but oddly melancholy, as if sorrow had soaked into the walls. He operated it as a tobacco plantation for 5 years before financial difficulties forced him to sell. The property changed hands 3 more times before the Civil War, each owner staying only a few years, each citing an undefined discomfort with the place. During the Civil War, Belmont Manor was used briefly as a field hospital for Confederate soldiers. A nurse named Sarah Whitfield kept a diary of her time there, writing about the men she treated and the conditions she endured. But she also wrote about other things. The soldiers say the house is haunted. They report hearing a woman singing at night, a low melody that seems to come from the upper floors. Some claim to have seen a figure in the windows, a woman with a sad face looking out toward the garden. I dismissed these accounts as fever dreams until I heard the singing myself. It was 3 a.m, and I was tending to a soldier with gangrene. The song drifted through the halls, soft and mournful, in a language I couldn't identify. I went to investigate, but when I climbed the stairs, the singing stopped. I found only empty rooms and the persistent feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. After the war, in the chaos of Reconstruction, Belmont Manor fell into disrepair. The fields were abandoned. The house itself became a shell, its roof collapsing in sections, its windows broken, its walls exposed to the elements. The garden where 6 children had been buried became overgrown with weeds and wild vines. For nearly 60 years, the property sat empty, slowly being reclaimed by nature, forgotten by everyone except local residents who passed down stories about the place. Stories about seeing lights in the windows of the abandoned house. Stories about hearing infant cries coming from the overgrown garden. Stories about a woman in old-fashioned dress walking the grounds at dawn, heading always toward the eastern corner where a magnolia tree once stood. In 1923, the property was purchased by a developer who planned to subdivide it for residential housing. During the initial survey, workers discovered the 6 graves in what had been the garden. The stones were still there, though worn and tilted, their inscriptions barely legible. Thomas, Margaret, Benjamin, Elizabeth, William, Charlotte, 6 children, all died before their first birthday, all buried in the same small plot. The developer, following the law, contacted local authorities about relocating the remains. A brief newspaper article appeared in the Richmond Times-Dispatch on May 3, 1923, titled "Infant Graves Found at Former Plantation Site." The article mentioned the discovery but provided no context about who the children were or why they had died. Hannah Prescott's great-granddaughter, a woman named Ruth Henderson, saw that newspaper article. She was 71 years old at the time and had been carrying her great-grandmother's oral history in her memory for decades. She wrote a letter to the newspaper, published on May 10, 1923, that told Celia Whitmore's story as Hannah had remembered it. The letter caused a brief sensation. Other descendants of Belmont Manor's enslaved population came forward with their own family stories, fragments that corroborated Ruth's account. A pattern emerged of whispered knowledge that had been passed down through generations. Knowledge about the beautiful woman who had borne 6 children to the master. Knowledge about how those children had all died mysteriously. Knowledge about the packets of herbs found in Celia's hands when she was buried. The Richmond Historical Society conducted an investigation, interviewing descendants, examining surviving records, attempting to piece together the truth. Their report, published in 1924, concluded that, while the full circumstances surrounding the deaths of the 6 infants at Belmont Manor cannot be determined with certainty, the evidence suggests a tragedy of exploitation, grief, and possible resistance that deserves to be acknowledged and remembered. The report recommended that the graves be left undisturbed, that a proper memorial be erected, and that Celia Whitmore's burial site be identified and marked. None of those recommendations were implemented. The Depression arrived, then World War II, and Celia Whitmore's story faded once again into obscurity. The developer's plans for the property were abandoned due to economic conditions. The land sat empty for another 40 years, slowly reverting to forest, the graves hidden beneath undergrowth, the house finally collapsing completely in a storm in 1952. In 1967, when Belmont Manor was being prepared for potential historical site designation, researchers conducted the comprehensive survey I mentioned earlier. They found the 6 graves, still intact beneath decades of accumulated soil and vegetation. They found the root system from the magnolia tree still wrapped around the small coffins. And they found, using metal detectors and careful excavation, the approximate location of Celia Whitmore's unmarked grave in the burial ground, beyond where the tobacco fields had been. That's when they discovered the cloth bundle with the 6 packets of poisonous plants. The discovery created an ethical dilemma that historians are still debating. If Celia Whitmore did poison her children, Was she a murderer, or was she performing the only act of mercy available to her? If she used those same herbs to hasten her own death, was it suicide or was it escape? And most troublingly, how do we remember someone who may have committed what the law defines as heinous crimes, but who was herself a victim of an inhuman system that gave her no good choices? Dr. Margaret Sullivan, a bioethicist and historian who has studied the case extensively, published a paper in 2015 that attempted to address these questions. "We cannot judge Celia Whitmore by the moral standards of our time," she wrote. "We must understand her within the context of her reality. She was enslaved. She was repeatedly raped by the man who owned her. She bore 6 children who would have lived in legal and social limbo, neither enslaved nor free, forever marked by circumstances they didn't choose. If she did end their lives, and I believe the evidence suggests she did, then we must understand it as an act of maternal love expressed in the only way available to her. She saved them from a life of suffering by giving them a gentle death in infancy. It was an impossible choice, a choice no mother should ever have to make. But within the brutal logic of American slavery, it may have been the most loving thing she could do. Not everyone agrees with this interpretation. Some historians argue that we're romanticizing infanticide, imposing modern sensibilities about death with dignity onto a historical situation where the facts are unclear. Others suggest that the children's deaths may have been natural, that the packets of herbs were gathered for some other purpose, that we're creating a narrative of resistance where there may have been only tragedy and coincidence. These debates continue in academic journals and at historical conferences, with no consensus emerging. But while historians debate, something else has been happening. The site of Belmont Manor, now part of a Virginia state forest, has become a place of pilgrimage. Women, particularly mothers, visit the memorial that was finally erected in 2003. They leave flowers at the 6 small markers that have been placed where the children were buried. They leave notes, messages, offerings. Many of the notes speak to Celia directly, thanking her for her sacrifice, asking her to rest in peace, telling her that her children are free now, that her suffering is acknowledged, that she is not forgotten. In 2018, a descendant of the Belmont family, a woman named Patricia Belmont Chen, established a foundation dedicated to researching and memorializing enslaved women who were sexually exploited by enslavers. The foundation funded the creation of a larger memorial at the site, one that includes not just the children's names but also Celia Whitmore's name, along with an inscription that reads, "Celia Whitmore, born approximately 1807. Died October 1st, 1834. She bore 6 children in 6 years. She buried 6 children before turning 28. She endured what no person should endure. She made choices no person should have to make. She is remembered." The memorial was dedicated on October 1st, 2018, exactly 184 years after Celia's death. More than 300 people attended, including descendants of enslaved people who had lived at Belmont Manor, historians who had studied the case, activists working on issues of reproductive justice and maternal health, and simply people who had been moved by Celia's story and wanted to bear witness. Patricia Belmont Chen spoke at the dedication. "My ancestor Samuel Belmont was a rapist and an exploiter who destroyed a young woman's life in pursuit of his own selfish desires. I cannot undo what he did. I cannot bring back Celia or her children, but I can ensure that they are remembered, that their names are spoken, that their humanity is acknowledged. And I can commit myself and my family's resources to making sure that stories like this are never forgotten, because only by remembering can we hope to create a world where such things cannot happen again." The forest where Belmont Manor once stood is quiet now, especially in the early morning hours. But rangers who work there, along with visitors who come at dawn, report experiences that defy easy explanation. The sound of singing in a language no one recognizes, the feeling of being watched by benevolent eyes, the scent of flowers that aren't blooming, and most frequently, the sense of peace that descends on the site, particularly near the memorial, as if something that was restless has finally found rest. Science cannot validate these experiences. Perhaps they're psychological projections, the human need to find meaning and closure in tragedy, or perhaps there's something else, something that suggests consciousness persists beyond death in ways we don't understand. What matters is that people continue to visit, continue to remember, continue to speak Celia Whitmore's name and the names of her 6 children. Because in the end, that's all we can offer the dead. Not justice, which is impossible across the centuries. Not restitution, which cannot be made. But remembrance. The commitment to ensure that lives that were meant to be erased, stories that were meant to stay buried, are instead brought into the light and held up as evidence of what human beings endured, survived, and sometimes chose for themselves even within the most constrained circumstances. Celia Whitmore was 19 years old when she was purchased for her beauty. She was 27 when she died, her body destroyed by repeated pregnancies, her spirit broken by repeated losses. She bore 6 children and buried 6 children before turning 28. And if the evidence is correct, if the packets of herbs mean what they suggest, then she chose how and when those children would die, exercising the only form of control available to her, making the only choice that, in her circumstances, was hers to make. Was it murder? Was it mercy? Was it resistance? Was it love expressed in the most terrible way imaginable? Perhaps it was all of these things simultaneously. Perhaps that's what makes her story so difficult to process, so painful to contemplate, because it forces us to recognize that within systems of absolute oppression, moral categories become complicated. That the woman who kills her children to save them from slavery is both a murderer and a savior. That the ultimate act of maternal love might be to ensure your children never live long enough to suffer what you have suffered. These are truths that make us uncomfortable. They should make us uncomfortable. Because Celia Whitmore's story isn't just about the past. It's about the present, about the ways that exploitation, particularly sexual exploitation, particularly reproductive coercion, continues in forms that are sometimes subtler but no less real. It's about the choices women still face when their autonomy is constrained, when their bodies are treated as territory to be controlled by others, when their children's futures seem hopeless. Celia's story echoes across time because the fundamental questions it raises, about bodily autonomy, about maternal choice, about freedom and coercion, about love and suffering, are questions we still haven't fully answered. The magnolia tree that once stood over those 6 graves is long gone. But in 2019, volunteers planted a new magnolia sapling near the memorial, a living symbol of remembrance and renewal. It will take decades to grow into maturity, to develop the kind of extensive root system that the original tree had. But already just a few years later, it's thriving. Its roots reaching down into soil that holds the memory of 6 small bodies and 1 woman who loved them enough to let them go. If you're still here, if you've stayed through this entire account, then you understand why these stories matter. You understand that history isn't just wars and presidents and laws. It's individual lives, individual choices, individual moments of courage or desperation or love. It's Celia Whitmore at 19, being led into a room she didn't choose. It's Celia at 22, burying her first child. It's Celia at 27, holding her 6th baby and singing a lullaby in a language her captors didn't understand, saying goodbye to a daughter who would follow her siblings within days. These moments deserve to be remembered. These lives deserve to be acknowledged. The graves are there in the Virginia forest, marked now, tended now, visited now. The names are recorded: Thomas, Margaret, Benjamin, Elizabeth, William, Charlotte. And above them all, the name that was almost lost entirely, Celia Whitmore. She bore the master's bloodline and lost it all before turning 28. Whether she lost it through fate or choice, through tragedy or agency, we may never know with absolute certainty. But we know she lived. We know she suffered, we know she endured the unendurable, and we know that nearly 200 years after her death, her story still has the power to move us, to disturb us, to make us question our assumptions about love, about mercy, about the choices people make when all their choices are terrible. In the absence of justice, we offer remembrance. In the place of restitution, we offer recognition, and in acknowledgement of suffering that can never be undone, we commit ourselves to ensuring it is never forgotten. Celia Whitmore's voice was silenced in life. But her story speaks now, carried forward by those who refuse to let it be buried again. It speaks in historical archives and academic papers. It speaks in memorial gardens and at dedication ceremonies. It speaks in the hearts of mothers who visit her grave and understand, perhaps better than anyone, the impossible love that might drive a woman to make the choices she made. This is the story of Celia Whitmore and her 6 children. This is the story that Belmont Manor tried to hide, that historians initially avoided, that society found too disturbing to fully confront. But it's also the story of resistance and remembrance, of how buried truths eventually surface, of how voices silenced in life can still be heard, if we're willing to listen. The magnolia sapling grows. The memorial stands. The names are recorded. And Celia Whitmore, the slave of beauty who bore the master's bloodline and lost it before turning 28, is remembered. Not as a footnote in plantation records, not as property in transaction ledgers, but as a woman who lived, who loved in whatever way she could, who made choices with her own hands, and who, in the end, is not forgotten. That is how her story ends. With remembrance, with recognition, with the commitment that her name and her children's names will be spoken, that their humanity will be acknowledged, that their suffering will serve as a reminder of what humans have endured and what we must ensure never happens again. Remember Celia Whitmore. Remember Thomas, Margaret, Benjamin, Elizabeth, William, and Charlotte. Remember that behind every historical statistic, every enslaved person counted in a census. Every transaction recorded in a ledger, there was a full human life. And sometimes, just sometimes, fragments of those lives survive long enough for us to piece them together, to tell their stories, to ensure they are not lost to time. This is her story, and now it's yours to carry forward.